So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
Said American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his first inaugural address, and many Roman philosophers would have agreed with him. Nevertheless, the Latin language contains many ways to say that someone is afraid. You can use a noun as a direct object of a verb expressing fear. For example, time sonum feri, you fear the sound of iron. You can use a fearing verb with a noun and participle as a direct object to indicate more about this noun. For example, time sonum feri per silentium noctis ridentem. You fear the sound of iron returning through the silence of the night. You can also use a special kind of subordinate clause called a fear clause. A fear clause is a subordinate clause that indicates some action that terrifies someone. In the main clause, the verb conveys the emotion fear and triggers the subordinate fear clause. These fearing verbs include timeo temere, verior verere, and metuo metuere. The subordinate clause, then, begins with the conjunction ne or ut. These conjunctions are, somewhat logically, used in a different way than they are used in purpose clauses. In fear clauses, ne is used when the subject fears something happens, and ut is used when the subject fears that something does not or will not happen. In the subordinate clause, the verb is subjunctive and follows the sequence of tenses. Let's look at a sample fear clause. Multi tement, ne effigies sonum feri faciens sibi noceat. We know this is a fear clause for several reasons. First, the verb in the main clause, tement, indicates fear and it is followed by a subordinate clause. Second, the subordinate clause begins with the conjunction ne. Thirdly, the subordinate clause contains a subjunctive verb. We can translate most fear clauses pretty literally. If we translate the sentence literally, we get, many people fear lest the ghost making the sound of iron would harm them. We just need to be careful about the conjunction ne or ut. Here, the ne indicates that the multi do not want the action of the subordinate clause to happen, so we need to make sure our translation reflects this. Therefore, we can clarify the translation as, many people fear that the ghost making the sound of iron will harm them. Let's look at another fear clause, including the word ut instead of ne. Attenedoris veritur ut effigiem adiuare possit. If we translate this sentence literally, we get Athenodorus fears that he might be able to help the ghost. Unfortunately, this is not what the sentence actually says, because it uses the conjunction ut. Remember that with fear clauses, ut indicates something that the person does not want to happen. Therefore, we need to add the word not to our translation. Athenodorus fears that he might not be able to help the ghost. Now it is your turn to practice recognizing and translating a fear clause. Multi Athenienses temebant, ne domum cum effigiae emerent. How do we know this is a fear clause? The main verb temebant conveys fear, the conjunction ne introduces a subordinate clause, and the verb emerent is an imperfect subjunctive verb. Therefore, we know this sentence contains a fear clause. So, how do we translate this sentence? Many Athenians were afraid lest they buy a house with a ghost. Or, many Athenians were afraid that they would buy a house with a ghost. Or, even the more loose, many Athenians were afraid to buy a house with a ghost.